Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Columbus, Ohio, it's time for Columbus Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Columbus Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today we have with us Jeff Dickson with Alloy. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee.
Well, I'm excited to learn about what you're up to. Can you tell us about Alloy? How are you serving folks?
Yeah, Alloy is a small consulting firm here in Columbus, Ohio. We predominantly focus on change management and business strategy consulting, essentially helping businesses grow. And just in the past maybe 4 or 5 years, where we've typically focused on Fortune 500 organizations, we've also expanded to now working with medium-sized organizations as well as a couple of nonprofits. So that's been kind of a fun addition, but that's our primary work that we do.
So how'd you get into this line of work? What's your background?
You know what? I started at Verizon Wireless and started out in kind of from a marketing perspective. And I think I've always just been interested, even back in those days when I first started, I've always been interested in how the various departments work together to really grow the organization. Sometimes you kind of sit in a department, at least early in your career anyways, and you kind of wonder, how is this making the bigger engine go, right? And for me, I was always trying to get cross-trained, trying to understand, how does finance work? How does operations work? How does HR work? And I think sometimes it gets frustrating because you don't see necessarily how what you're doing every day kind of links to this bigger picture. But that's kind of what inspired me to get into consulting and do the work that I do today.
So you started out in a fairly large firm and spent a lot of your time working in those firms in a consulting capacity after you left, I guess, the big corporate world?
Yeah. It was it was a little bit of a change, but I've been doing this now for a little over 15 years, and really, to me, business was always personal. This is where we spend a majority of our lives, and you want to make an impact for the better, and this is a way that I just love working with leaders that share that same vision, that want to make that type of impact and grow their organization. And I think I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial side to me, so kind of worked out. But yeah, that was kind of the transition from big corporate world to small business world, and then kind of back again, because those were the organizations we serve.
Now, when you were kind of on your own, now you're an entrepreneur, you're not part of a big entity anymore. How was that personally to make that change? Because talk about change management. When you're coming from a world where everything's taken care of, there's help desk, there's a lot of resources all around you, and now it's you and maybe a smaller team, and you're kind of doing all the roles. How was that change management for you personally?
I think it was quite the black and white stark contrast, really, just because some of those, like you said, there's a help desk when things go down, and all of a sudden you're learning how to be the IT support, you're learning how to be the operations support, you're wearing a lot of hats. But to be quite honest, Lee, if just doing some of the research on our own, we started to see that's becoming more and more regular. I mean, it's becoming more the norm rather than the exception, where everyone's wearing a lot of hats. I think Deloitte came out with a study just last year that said, in the next 10 years, you'll be doing at least twice to 3 times as many different types of jobs than you are today, or than your predecessors did. So I'm feeling that at one time that was just kind of the role of the entrepreneur that was wearing a lot of hats. But anymore today, I feel like that's becoming the norm for just about anybody that we work with, whether they're a Fortune 500, nonprofit, or somewhere in between.
And that leads me to my kind of a follow-up on that is, how did you kind of develop this philosophy, this non-routine leadership philosophy? Is it based on seeing that trend happening where at one point, maybe in big corporate America, there were people that were just kind of cogs in the machine, but now the machine's moving so quickly and no one knows where it's going, and you're having to deal with so much chaos that's really not an efficient kind of philosophy to run a business anymore.
Absolutely. And in fact, non-routine leadership, really, that you're exactly right, Lee. That was the impetus of the research study. We were really just trying to understand how are organizations growing in spite of this growing kind of non-routine climate that we live in. And when I say non-routine, I just mean unfamiliar and complex. If I stare at an engine as a mechanic, it might be a complex thing, but because it's familiar to me, I feel very confident and I can handle it. On this flip side, if something's very simple, like maybe changing oil, in that particular sense, if I'm changing oil for now a plane instead of a car, all of a sudden, wait a minute, that's unfamiliar to me. So, but when you put unfamiliar and complex together, all of a sudden, we start seeing businesses decline and really just because of that internal instability. A lot of people think of like the market's changing or competitive changes. That's what they kind of think of when they think of non-routine challenges. But in all actuality, 80 to 90%, depending on what size of business you are, 80 to 90% of the reason why you're stagnating or not growing to the capacity that you could is because of internal non-routine challenges. And that's something that we see every day. I mean, we kind of wake up in the morning without the playbook for the day. We wake up in the morning without precedent, sometimes not even necessarily sure what it exactly we're going to be doing that day. And again, that used to be the parlance of small businesses, but really today it's becoming everybody's business. I mean, if you look at the half-life of skills, we're having to learn new technology all the time. The half-life of skills is at a record lows, well below like a 5-year half-life. 80% of employees are saying, hey, they don't feel prepared for today, let alone tomorrow's demands. So a lot of these non-routine challenges are taking a toll. And at the end of our study, although we continue to do research, one of the most basic insights that we got out of that study was that this decline in business is not so much on external markets as much as it is on the leader themselves. So we didn't go into non-routine leadership to think of it as a leadership program, like some may. We were trying to figure out how do we get businesses to grow more consistently and stable with a more stable approach. So non-routine leadership kind of started out as a study, but it ended up as a program to help leaders, grow their organization, their team, and even themselves. So that's kind of that transition for us, and it really transformed how we consulted. It transformed how we operate ourselves. So it was quite transformational for us, and we're starting to see quite the transformations in others, especially given the climate that we're in today. Everybody seems to be aware of how many non-routine challenges there are these days.
Now, do you think that some of the challenges in larger organizations or companies or even government that has a lot of bureaucracy, where there's a lot of people whose jobs are I just want to hang in here. I don't want to shake anything up. I want to keep things the status quo, and I'm very protective of my territory, my job, whatever I'm doing, and I'm not really in for change, or I don't, I'm trying to retire in 5 years or 10 years. I'm just trying to get out of here alive. I'm that large organizations are kind of, they almost, I don't want to say this, but maybe it's true that they hire for a certain type of personality that wants to kind of change around the edges, but doesn't want to do anything really dramatic. They're more about evolution than revolution. But with change happening so rapidly and technology kind of improving so exponentially, that you have to be able to make sudden change like this. You can't. There is that world of a manufacturing plant and that model in your head of that's how business is. We can run everything automated and with less thinking and just cogs in the machine. I think for a lot of companies, that just doesn't work at all anymore. There's too much change. Things are changing constantly, and you have to be nimble.
Yeah, no question. I couldn't agree more. And Lee, unfortunately, I think we see status quo bias at every level of organization. I including myself, if I'm being honest. I mean, we're kind of, our brains are kind of associative machines. We like things that we can relate to. We like things that are familiar, whether we're honest or dishonest with ourselves, I suppose. We all like a little bit of status quo. And if we're being honest from just a strictly financial perspective, that's where you find the most margins, right? So you want to protect some of these things from changing every day if you can. But at the same time, to your point, Lee, like we can't rest on our laurels. We have to constantly be learning. And I think one way to do that, and one of the principles of non-routine leadership is rethinking leadership itself. I mean, if I hear all the time this phrase problem solving. I'm a great problem solver. In fact, in interviews, we'll hear that too. That's my number one quality. I'm a great problem solver. And that's kind of how leaders think of themselves. They're the fixers, the problem solvers. And I think that's the first thing that needs to be questioned in a world where the problems aren't actually clear in the first place. So what are we solving? But all too often, we walk into a room and people are solving problems that they don't understand, that they can't yet really make sense of. In fact, one of the probably largest insights that came out of that study, and really from our consulting work, is that the number one advantage, the number one skill in leadership today is no longer problem solving. It is now what you might call sense making, and that's just a academic term for making sense of non-routine challenges or making sense of things that are ambiguous and uncertain. And too often, though, we kind of treat it like it's just another routine. We go in there, we try solving the problems, and only to find out that the problem wasn't what we thought it was, or we're just kind of back to, my earlier pain point of working in a company where I was just kind of checking boxes and not sure why I was even doing it. So there is a shift that I think first needs to happen among leaders to get back on a growth track, is to stop thinking of ourselves so much as problem solvers, although I'm sure we'll solve plenty of problems, but really to shift from problem solver to a sense maker, or from solver to sense maker is kind of how we say it internally here. So that's a tough shift, because it's not just about asking questions, but asking better questions and being able to frame problems a lot better. We're used to solving them. In fact, we spend 16 plus years of our of learning just on how to solve problems. But really, leaders' number one job today is to make sense of the situation, to make sense of the problem. And that's essentially what we help organizations do, whether it's through consulting or through non-routine leadership, is to help leaders make sense of today's non-routine world so that they can grow their organization as well as their team and themselves.
So now, do you find that leaders even consider a world where their company isn't in it? And then what are they going to do, or what can they do to keep their company in this new ever-changing world? Because I think that a lot of companies fall into the trap of the assumption that we're always going to be part of the future. So how do we fit in? And those problems that we're solving is just the problem of, okay, how are we going to deal with whatever the chaos is in the future? Whereas you don't see kind of the incumbent coming up with the new technology. They're kind of lagging that. There's some upstart that sees the world slightly differently and then goes out on this edge, or even farther than the edge, and then says this world can exist over here. And then the incumbent all of a sudden is caught with their pants down, that they're like, how did this happen? How did this even occur?
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. I would respond to that in two ways. Once upon a time, I think it was the small businesses that were doing a majority of the innovation. Today, it's fairly evened out. And from a research perspective, small businesses are not out innovating the larger organizations anymore. However, just from pure observation, I don't have any research to back this up, it does seem like the smaller organizations have the bigger imaginations, whereas the larger organizations are better at going to market, right? They've got the platforms, the technology platforms and the operational platforms to go to market much, much faster. But I do think there is an issue with how to kind of equip our teams to face a future that we don't necessarily understand. I was just talking to a president of an organization down in Cincinnati. He said, I'm extremely scared, in not so many words, that, I've been doing this for 30 years and I wouldn't know how to tell the next guy to sell our products, because the way that I sold millions and millions of dollars worth of products, I can't tell him to sell that way. I can't tell her to use these strategies. Things are different. And so we actually wrote an article about this on our website, about catching lightning, this idea of how to be a serial innovator in a world where things are changing so often. And again, sense making becomes a key component, the ability to scan the trends in the world around you, without making everything trial and error. No offense to the Agile community. I think Agile has its place, but I also think we've kind of we've swung that pendulum a little too far, where everything is all about doing and kind of delivering, when there might be a better way to begin that process in a way to avoid near as many costly mistakes. So there's a balance out there, and I wish, Lee, I had all the answers. But I do know that this just simply from a leadership perspective, to begin for leaders to start thinking differently rather than becoming those problem solvers, to really be the sense makers, to understand what clues to look for in your environment, how to frame up those problems, how to equip that next generation to handle the non-routine. Those are the types of things that we have been working with organizations of all sizes to be able to get past, because it's not an easy feat. I think we've seen remarkable improvements, and especially in the world of growth decision making. What I mean by that is decisions that determine growth trajectories. So we're seeing exponential improvements in that arena. But at the same time, there's just sometimes, to your point about what is that future, I don't have that crystal ball. I wish I did.
Right. Well, I don't think there's an answer. I think that's the point of this, that it's the question that matters, that to just ask the questions, to get people thinking, to start connecting dots, to seeing where there's patterns. And if you're not even asking the questions, then you don't stand a chance. Yeah.
And also, this, I think, even before just the ability to, the word sense and sense making, it suggests that you sensed that there was a non-routine challenge in the first place, or you sensed that there was an opportunity in the first place. And I think a lot of us, because we get in the grind of the everyday and we do like our routines, that we don't take a second to pause and reflect and find that extraordinary in the ordinary, or find that that opportunity where people kind of have fears and challenges. So there's also a change in even some of our virtues, how we, the kinds of things that we value and look for. I tell the story when I was teaching my kids how to drive. I taught them very specific things to look for. Obviously look for that stop sign. That's a railroad sign. And I even taught them about blind spots. Look in this rear view mirror. Look at that rear view mirror. But in non-routine, I can't give you the details because I've never done that before, or it's at least very unfamiliar to me. So instead, I have to use, to your point of pattern recognition, I have to train my intuition so that in the heat of the moment, I'm looking for abstract components rather than very detailed and finite problem-solving kind of things. So even how we sense the world around us, I think, has to change. And that takes a while. I mean, training our intuition, and the reason why I even say train our intuition is because we can't just be constantly vigilant, every single second of every day. We've got to get work done. But in those heat of the moment kind of situations, our intuitions need to be trained to the point where we know exactly what are the questions. Again, I can't tell you how many times I walk into a meeting where the goal is unclear, the problem is unclear, the diagnosis of the problem is unclear, even options are unclear. To start off with, I just suggest that leaders just begin to learn 3 basic questions, or 3 basic words: wow, why, and what else. Wow, take some time to pause and reflect and see, kind of reflect on these tough challenges, or even, beautiful opportunities in front of you. Just take it into, rather than running straight into the problem solving mode that we all like to be in. You'll find that you'll notice a lot more and see a lot more opportunity than maybe at first. Why is just understanding, again, back to the goal, or why the problem is happening. What is the problem? Those types of things. And then what else gives you those types of options, right? Too many times our blind spots is that it's coming from one perspective, our own. So what else allows us to kind of start thinking, from other people's perspectives, or just, to get away from what's called the availability heuristic. The very first thing that you think of, not only do you usually go with that, you usually think it's the most important idea. I don't know if that's an ego thing or not, but for what it's worth, what else helps us be a little more creative, add a little cognitive diversity to the kind of situation. And they're real simple things but I think it's because they're so simply that's why we overlook them, to be quite honest. So there's a few simple concepts like that go a long, long way in today's non-routine world versus jumping right into the solution mindset.
Now, you mentioned that you're broadening kind of your target market on who you consult with. Can you talk about the pain that those organizations are having where Alloy is the solution? Yeah,
I mean, for larger organizations, it continues to be, corporate and business strategy, as well as change management. For nonprofits and medium-sized organizations, we tend to take a more, corporate approach. For instance, we were just helping a nonprofit that really had gone about 3 years without really understanding what their product is. And that's, I think your average person from the outside would just say, wow, that's amazing. How can that even be? But, from a strategic perspective, I don't think a lot of people, if they say, what is business? They can't just kind of quickly give a definition to a business. And if you think about it in the most simplistic form, a business is basically the mobilization of resources. So understanding your resources, understanding how to mobilize them that uses your strengths. So we've been able to figure out how to help these smaller organizations in more bite-sized fashion, as well as just through this non-routine leadership course. That's been the primary way that we've helped smaller organizations. We even have, and there's a upcoming course that starts on January 19th for non-routine leadership. And we've got Fortune 500 representatives there. We've got government leaders, we've got small business, and even solopreneurs, to be quite honest. So that's an area where we can really begin to help leaders with, some of those fundamental challenges of just growing their organization. So in some ways, it's not very different than the way that we help larger organizations. It's just that larger organizations have more moving parts. And being able to do that with less resources and less time for the smaller organizations is the name of that game for sure.
So now are you also kind of looking for more consultants to teach them about this non-routine leadership?
Absolutely. Yes. And I appreciate you saying that, Lee. Sometimes I get into these modes where I pretend like I've got it all figured out. That's one area that we're definitely struggling. And if your audience has some great consultants, especially folks with nonprofit and small and medium-sized business background, that would be great. I think we've got a real great team for larger organizations, but I think we could use some more help in that arena for sure.
And if somebody wanted to learn more and connect with you or somebody on your team, what's the website?
Alloy.institute. You can also go to nonroutineleadership.com and it'll take you to the same place. But yeah, again, if someone's interested in the program, as far as what we're using the January 19th class for is to, help people just send one or two people to the course before signing up their entire organization or all of their leaders up at once, kind of to test out the course themselves. But so far, things are going real well, and we'll see. Continue to see how non-routine leadership changes, because I'm sure we continue to learn from the folks that attend the course, and as well from our own consulting experience. So, but yeah, if you're a nonprofit, we do offer discounts for nonprofits if they're attending the course. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I think we have 4 or 5 seats still available for this particular course coming up.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your story today. We really appreciate you. You're doing important work. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Lee. It's been my pleasure.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Columbus Business Radio.